run out of steam, we can always take the free will question.
Okay, absolutely. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. You know, whenever we have a doctor on the show in general, but today's guest in particular, we get a lot of questions. So please get them to us in advance. Simply sign up at chefaj.com. Once a week, we send you the schedule. You respond to that email with your question, because when it's live, it's too late. So back by popular demand is everyone's favorite psychologist, Dr. Doug Lisle. It's so great to see you again.
Always great to see you, AJ.
Yeah, well, we have questions, and let's just jump into them right now. So the first one, Dr. Lisle, is from Nat, and it's about, what are your thoughts on psychotherapy, fasting, and medication to deal with BPD, borderline personality disorder? Or do you suggest going to a normal psychotherapist? That's an oxymoron. No, just kidding. Or psychiatrist. Can Dr. Lisle help with borderline personality disorder? And do you recommend booking an appointment with him?
That's a very interesting question, and an understandable one for someone who's dealing with a person with borderline personality, or if you've been diagnosed with it. So let's talk about, first of all, we need to get straight what the truth is. The concept of a personality disorder, the concept of calling it a disorder is actually a fundamental mistake. So the people that have been writing the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychiatry, for the last 80 years. I think the first one came out, maybe 60 years, maybe in the 1960s. It's been through several versions of this. I don't know what we're on now, 6. I don't pay attention anymore. They'll use terms like that. So they'll say, attention deficit disorder, and they'll say, borderline personality disorder, and then they'll say, substance abuse disorder. And this is their way of talking to each other and categorizing things so that we can have a language about it. It's kind of like saying, saying somebody is tall. You say somebody's tall, and you might say they're very tall. Okay, so you might say, well, what's the guy's height? Average. What's the guy's height? Tall. What's the guy's height? Very tall. What's the guy's height? He's a giant. Well, if somebody tells me they're a giant, I'm not really sure if that's taller than very tall or not. These are just descriptive terms. They're not actually giving me anything other than relative information. They're not sort of like giving me the facts. But it's better than nothing. And in the last few decades, as psychiatry has attempted to try to figure out what they're looking at, it's got, I'm rambling around here, AJ, because it's actually a really good question, and I will get to it. The early science, folks, in a field consists not of sophisticated experiments or sophisticated understanding. It consists of observations and description. So that's where we start. We try to learn about anything. So we start by making observations, try to make careful observations, and then try to write descriptions of what it is that we see. We don't know why it's happening. So for example, let's suppose, the Great Barrier Reef appears to be, in trouble. Okay, so we go make observations. We're like, gee, have we made previous observations before? Does it actually go through a cyclical process where there's a problem, or are we actually observing something really important? And it's like, well, maybe if we make enough observations one day, we'll say, no, there's actually a serious problem. And then we'll say, well, what could be causing the problem? And then we start to go through a causal analysis to try to figure out why we're observing what we're observing. So we can see that when we start making descriptions, we're a long ways from understanding what on earth we're looking at or why we're looking at it. The concept of a personality disorder turns out to be, finally, after 50 or 60 years of legitimate scientific investigation into personality, it turns out to be a fallacy. So the notion that something became disordered in development, or something is fundamentally disordered in the person's head that we can fix because there's something wrong. This is a mistake. It's actually a misunderstanding of the truth. What you're looking at is you're looking at someone who's, quote, very tall. If I told you that there was somebody who was very, very tall, you'd say, oh my gosh, that if it's a woman, we'd be thinking 6'3" or 6'4". If it was a man, we'd be thinking 6'8" or higher. We'd be like, that guy is very, very tall, right? But is there anything wrong with a guy that's 6'8"? Do we call this tall disorder? No, you're just an outlier on a bell curve that you don't see very often. And that's what a, quote, borderline personality disorder is. It's not a disorder, it's just a personality variation. And it's going to turn out that if we look at the big five, in the description of the big five, so we look at openness, conscientiousness, introversion, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. If we look down through there, the big five is a very good capture of the five major variations, five ingredients to the human personality. Notice how different such a concept is than types. So if you've ever done the Myers-Briggs or other things, you're used to people talking about types. That's because talking about types is a hell of a lot easier than talking about ingredients and combinations. It's simple for people, and it turns out that talking in types really doesn't have any scientific or empirical validity at all. All that you're really saying when you use the word types, AJ, like a Scorpio, what you're really doing is you're describing parts of the big five that happen to be prominent for that individual. So types, we think it's simpler to think in terms of types, but it's actually wrong. So that would be like saying, well, there's tall men and short men. No, there aren't tall men and short men. There's men that differ along the continuum, for goodness sakes. And that continuum is actually measurable. And the same thing is true of borderline personality disorder. This is not a, quote, borderline personality disorder. This is an individual that's disagreeable and unstable. And probably could be what's even worse is if you get one that's got lower conscientiousness. But mostly all you're talking about is a combination between disagreeable and unstable. And by the way, almost always it's diagnosed in women. Why? Because when it's diagnosed, when this very same combination shows up in men, disagreeable and unstable, we call it a narcissist. And that's because they're bossing everybody around. That's because they're men and they are often in charge of things just by the nature of man-woman dynamics and the way the world is laid out. Men, get to the top of dominance hierarchies. They want to knife other people in the back and stomp on their neck and get there. That's why most of the CEOs of the world are men. It's not because we defer to men. It's because they fight like hell to get there, because they've got more to gain by taking territory. They are territory-taking machines. Women are more want to be invited and included. And so if they're disagreeable, they're not necessarily trying to take the territory and get in charge. They just want to be included. And when they get any signs that they're not being included in the group, they get all bent out of shape and pissed off. Okay. And so when narcissistic, i.e. people, i.e. disagreeable and unstable men, when we run into them, we're like, whoa, look out, run for cover, get your lawyer, get away from this person. They're dangerous and they're impulsive, and watch out, we're in for a fight. When it's a woman with exactly the same general personality characteristics, i.e. disagreeable and unstable, when we get that, what we get is, oh my God, you do anything even slightly rejecting for her, and she's just absolutely bent out of shape like you can't believe. Now, she doesn't want to be in charge. She just wants to be included, okay? And so the biggest place that you see, quote, borderlines showing their hands is going to be in in romantic relationships, because they're very often going to wind up rejected because they're unstable and disagreeable. And when that happens, they go ballistic, okay? And they do very unstable looking things. Like I had one borderline that ran her car right through her boyfriend's plate glass window in the front of his house. She survived, everybody survived, but she made her point. Don't abandon me. Okay, so the judge took care of that. All right, so borderlines, this is the old, movies are made. Play Misty for Me, is a famous movie about a borderline with Clint Eastwood, one of the best ones that was ever made. Anyway, so now we're going to talk about, quote, treating borderline personality disorder. Well, folks, you don't treat personalities. You don't fix personalities because personalities are fixed by the genetic code. So they just are what they are. So the way you treat them is the way you treat yourself. Don't try to change yourself, try to change your environment. The best thing that you can do for your personality is to plop it in an environment where it's most conducive to its happiness. So if you're somebody that likes a lot of little fine details and you're smart and you're good with numbers and you are highly introverted, then being an accountant is a very good thing for you. Okay, don't go to Hollywood to get work. You're not a creative director for a show. No, you're an accountant, and that's where your personality is going to be best off. In the Living Wisdom Library that Jen and I do, people ask us in our questions a lot about personality. That's because personality issues are coming up all the time in humans' lives with people that they've got conflicts with, struggles with themselves. Question we get a lot is, well, how can I be just so less perfectionistic, so less hard on myself? Answer, you can't. Okay. Your job is, Jen came up with, I think, the best metaphor that I've ever heard for this. She calls it the potted plant theory. That if you are a sun worshiping plant that needs a lot of water, then you need to be in the sun with a lot of water. If you're a plant that needs a lot of shade with moderate water, then you need to find shade with moderate water. That's how you have to treat any creature. So I don't look at somebody when they walk in my door and say, oh, it's a borderline personality disorder. That means it was abused as a child and it has some psychodynamic twisted thing, and that they really do a lot better on antidepressants with a mood stabilizer. That is classic, quote, psychodynamic learning theory and psychopharm bullshit all the way down. They will not do better with pharmacology. Okay, you can read Robert Whitaker's book and show that that's a big waste of time and disaster. They are not going to do better with psychodynamic psychotherapy. They're not going to do better with dialectical behavior therapy, even though Linehan tries to pretend that she found something interesting about it when she did not. Okay, no, what's going to work is the potted plant theory. We have to look at the fact that you are disagreeable and unstable, and we have to put you in situations where you might be less likely to have yourself exacerbated. You don't want to put an OCD person, where they have to work in a dirty kitchen. It's like that's a disaster for them. And so that's the treatment of quote borderline personality disorder is no different than the in principle treatment of all people, which is let's understand who you are, let's understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, figure out how it is that we can help reduce the stresses that you have due to your environmental circumstances, and hope for the best. And that's it. In other words, and we'll never fix you. Like you are your, that's like saying, well, we're going to make Alan like kind and gentle and pleasant and agreeable. We will never make Alan kind and gentle and pleasant and agreeable. Alan is going to be disagreeable, extremely conscientious and tough. We will never change that. Okay. And someone say, well, Dr. Goldhammer, but you'd be so much more effective if you were well, maybe that would be true, but we're not going to fix it. Okay. So personality is unchangeable, unfixable, but it can be, quote, treated, not by treating the personality, but by attempting to think through what environmental circumstances we put that person in where they can do the best that they can.
Well, then psych meds don't make a whole lot of sense because you can't medicate a personality.
You can't medicate a personality, and that's schizophrenia as a personality. So in other words, we thought that these were diseases. In fact, They're coded in the International Classification for Diseases. They're considered, but they are not diseases. We now know for a fact everything that you see in the DSM is a gene variation. Okay, I would say there's some few exceptions. If you have a substance abuse disorder, the substance abuse process itself is impacting, your psychology. You are addicted to a supernormal stimuli and you're in trouble. That can happen to you regardless of your personality. So that is independent of your personality. But pretty much everything else that's in that manual, and including the way that psychologists and psychiatrists think about these things and talk about them, is fundamentally wrong. And so I know that's a heck of a statement, but I'm not out here by myself. I stand right next to the Pope of personality, Robert Clement, who is the most distinguished personality researcher in the last 100 years. Okay. And his book called Blueprint is available and very readable to a wide audience. That is the magna opus of his career. And he will tell you definitively, you ain't changing your kid and making your kid more conscientious by getting them to do their homework every night so that we develop good habits. That is a total waste of time. Your kid is going to be your kid, and they're going to be who it is that they are. And no matter what efforts you put in, you're not moving the needle by 1 inch. Okay. So our job is to figure out how can we have that child be as happy as possible in the circumstances that they are, given who it is that they are. That's our job. Our job is not to shape their personalities, because we will never do that.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect segue to the next question, which is also about personality, but as it pertains to the pleasure trap. Rajesh writes, having now read The Pleasure Trap and listened to Dr. Lisle's video on perfect personality, which I can put a link to if you'd like to see, it's a fabulous video. What practical tips can you give one who is very open, agreeable, and an extrovert to keep on the straight and narrow?
You're out of luck. You better make friends with people that are extremely conscientious about their food. That better be who it is that you're going out and hanging out with and meeting up with. Because if you are open enough to include a bunch of other people in that situation, you're going to run into some tougher customers than you that are going to be disagreeable. They're also going to be open, that are going to be eating oysters on a half shell and knocking down wine, and they're going to be living conventional lives, and you're going to be right there in the middle of conflict. It's going to be very difficult for you to manage this very well. So the answer to your question is, with those set of personality characteristics, it would take a very rare set of environmental circumstances for you to be successful. Okay. In other words, I would anticipate anybody that is open and agreeable, and what's the other thing?
Open,
extroverted,
and extroverted. Is that that's not the sucker?
Open.
Is that what you guys call the sucker triad?
No, second triad is going to be, agreeable, conscientious, and intelligent. And you're valuable because of your intelligence. You're agreeable because you'll do it, and you're conscientious that all they got to do is get you to agree to do it, and they know it's off their plate. And you are a sucker, and you're going down. No, but extroverted, agreeable, and open. That individual is a walking pleasure trap.
Wow. Okay. You got to tell me some people. I need to know some people who are in the sucker triad so I can get them to do some stuff for me.
Oh, totally, AJ. Be on the lookout and pass their names on to me.
Yeah, you got to get me some of those people. They sound like great employees.
They're good friends too.
Yeah, if anybody has those characteristics, please apply today. Operators are standing by. So this question from Meg is important because I hear a lot of people struggle with this, especially if they've had a tragic event, maybe like, loss of a child or losing a limb. I've actually heard this question. Dr. Lisle, from Meg, you spoke of your work on closing the loop on tragic events that hold people back. This resonated as a very powerful tool. Can you talk more about this the next time you're on Chef AJ Live, and examples of how this work would be great?
Yeah, they added a little phrase that I didn't have in any such explanation. Open loops aren't holding, it's rare that they're holding anybody's life back. what they could be is that they could be a source of confusion. Once in a blue moon, it can be a pretty significant confusion and disturbing for a person's life. It's rare, however. So once in a while, people can. Let me see if I can explain this more broadly. That the nature of how it is that you make decisions in order to you make decisions in order to distinguish between alternative courses of action. That's what a decision is. I could go to the left, I could go to the right. I could go to the store, I could stay home. That your life is nothing other than a series of decisions and then the consequences of those decisions. Now, what's going to happen is that once in a blue moon, people are going to experience some unexpected, very negative events. They will also experience some unexpected, very positive events. The negative events are going to be generally fundamentally more important. The reason why they're going to be fundamentally more important is when you lose, you can lose your whole life, but when you win, you can't get immortality. The downside is bigger in biology than the upside can be. And so as a result of that, you have to be on guard against tragedy, and your nervous system is actually very well designed to reduce the likelihood of tragedy. So you are afraid of predators, you are afraid of sketchy looking situations that look like they may not be safe. You have essentially warning systems well wired into your adaptive unconscious that keep you from having disasters happen. But occasionally disasters do happen. An auto accident can happen and transform somebody's life, or they could lose their life, and you could lose somebody close to you. These things happen. Now, when they happen, what's going to happen is there's going to be some psychological result. And your brains, your memory systems are designed to basically improve the performance of your decision making by increasing the precision of your understanding of the environment that you're looking at. So let me give you an example. Let's suppose that you're a rabbit that got chased out of a rabbit hole or got chased by some fox, and you had to run for your life. And you then ducked down a rabbit hole and stayed in there and survived. And then the next day you got up and looked around, no fox, and you're hungry. And you go out into a field and you wander around that field for half an hour and you find some carrots. Okay, good. So you eat your carrots and you got your eyes on, you keep looking for the fox and you're fine. And now you keep your eye on where your rabbit hole is, and you don't get too far, and it's convenient because your rabbit hole is pretty close to where the carrots are, not too far away, and everything's fine. When you go to sleep that night and you wake up the next morning, you will not wander all over that field looking for the carrots. You know exactly where to go. Why? Because you have a memory system. So your memory system is designed by nature to remember things that are important. And what we mean by important is something that has a significant impact on your biology. When you go to the store and you park your car and you go in and you come out, your car is important to you because that's your property. And that's how it is that you're going to get home. That's the key for the thing that you have. So you remember what it looks like and you remember where you parked it. Occasionally you'll get fooled. You'll be off one row, or you might even misremember where you parked it, because you usually park at one place and today you parked it somewhere different. But the bottom line is that you remember your car and you remember pretty much where you parked it. You don't remember what car was parked next to you because it's not important. Okay. Now you might remember if it's a gnarly car and it was the only thing left in the parking lot and a bunch of seedy people were in it and smoke was coming out of it, and you will remember, and you'll be a little concerned about your car while you're shopping. But let's suppose that it's just another car out there, just another Honda or another Camry. You don't have any memory of what car was parked next to you because it's so unimportant, but you remember your car. okay? You're designed by nature to remember things that are important. Things that are important are things that have either a high positive or negative impact on your biological success. So when, quote, tragedy happens, we remember it, okay? We remember it because that is like going over, if we're a rabbit and we're looking around, nosing around the field, looking for carrots, and then we glance over and we see a little swale, and that swale down in there, we see a couple little fox pups playing. No mama around. What happens? We take a beeline for back to our rabbit hole, and we're plotting about how we're going to get out of this whole area, because this is a very bad area to be in. Okay, that is what your brain is designed to do. Your brain is designed to remember and calculate the value of all stimuli, all on a continuum, like a piano keyboard that goes from the very worst thing that you could think of to the very best thing that you could think of. And the things that in the middle, at middle C, sound and taste like middle C, like it feels kind of boring and basic. Okay, it's not very important. As you move to the sides of the continuum on the piano, it gets lower and lower, i.e. scarier and scarier, higher and higher. It doesn't really sound more positive, but it is. Okay, now, so when we have had tragedy strike, what happens is that our nervous system found out something about our environment that we didn't know before. And we had underestimated it, its probability. We had not factored in that probability that effectively. And so as a result, it's a bit of a shock to the system, and we had some potentially catastrophic loss. As a result of that catastrophic loss, our nervous system is now aware that catastrophic losses can happen under those circumstances. It's now better informed. So the notion that tragedy or trauma causes people damage to the way they function psychologically would be a mistake. It isn't that couldn't be true. It's just that the overwhelming majority of time, it's going to be exactly the opposite. That what trauma will do is will improve the individual's functioning in order to more properly calculate the cost-benefit analysis of a class of stimuli. That's what it is, okay? Now, there are rare circumstances where it makes people actually less functional, but that's not typical at all. The notion in psychology today is that bad things cause bad damage to your nervous system. And we've got to shield our children from bad things and shield ourselves from bad things. And when we have bad things happen, we need to go to 4 years of psychotherapy and complain about it and cry about it to our therapist. This is all absurd. None of this is true. Tragedy actually improves the precision of the organism in order to make calculations in its best interest. The entire point to memory, is to improve your functioning. If memory did not improve animal functioning, they wouldn't have memories. If it turned out that horrific memories cause damage to human psychological functioning, humans simply wouldn't have horrific memories. The nervous system would be evolved in order to just completely ignore it. Now, psychodynamic therapists would say, it goes into repression, and then under there, that's why it's too painful to remember. That's total bullshit. There's no biological rationale for anything that remotely looks like that anywhere in neuroscience. It's not true. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. So when it comes to having had bad things happen to you, what will happen is if you don't understand why the bad thing happened, but your nervous system, your adaptive mind, i.e. your mind, unconsciously is calculating that it doesn't quite know why it happened, but it might be able to know why it happened. Then thinking about this over and over again represents an opportunity to actually possibly increase our functioning capability. If we can understand why our business failed, suppose we had, this goes on in Wall Street. Guys will use gambling systems to try to make stocks. And it's not uncommon for somebody to get rich and then go broke like 6 times in a career. And while that's happening, the 4th time through, they're like really analyzing the daylights out of what they did previously that caused them to make mistakes and what caused them to be successful. And they spend inordinate amount of time analyzing that. Why? Because they've had 4 tragedies and they don't want a 5th one. And so they're trying to figure it out. And when a 5th one happens, they're like, son of a gun, I analyzed the daylights out of this. It's like, right, but you still don't understand the mistake that you made. And because you don't understand it, the loop is open and the brain is taking a tremendous amount of energy to try to figure out what on earth what mistake did we make? Now, most people don't live in that kind of fiasco, but some people do, like surgeons. Like if you're a young surgeon and you think you did everything right and you lose the patient, believe me, a young surgeon will go home and they will analyze and analyze and analyze and analyze to try to figure out what on earth went wrong that should have worked. Okay. And then, someday they're going to talk to an old surgeon and the old surgeon's going to say, yeah, sometimes you just will never figure it out. Okay. Now, so what is trauma and the outcome of sometimes trauma, which is open loops, which is what I've talked about. So open loops is when your mind suspects that there was something that you could have known that would have prevented the trauma. And your mind will spend a certain amount of time and energy reanalyzing that because it was super important. There was a very big loss, and it estimates that there's a possibility that that loss could happen again. In other words, hey, we're unprepared because we don't actually understand the causal processes. So we have to leave a loop open. So I had a young woman that had a high school sweetheart, and then they were married for 10 years, and then it broke apart. And she, for 10 years or so, she wasn't sure why. And she couldn't really move on with anybody new because she had an open loop in her head that she just felt like, I think that was the right guy, and I don't understand why we didn't work things out, et cetera, et cetera. And so that loop raged in her head for a decade. And so when I came along and she talked to me about it, I said, oh, well, you got to go find him. You have to go talk to him. She goes, well, I know where he is. He's married in Florida. I said, yeah, you got to go see him. Okay, so she drove from California to Florida and she saw him and had lunch with him. That closed the loop. Okay, that closed the loop because her brain was like, now I see we're really in different places. This really isn't my guy. There is no magic there that's sitting there that was behind a misunderstanding. No, it feels completely different. Okay, so she got updated information and it closed the loop. So I've had some other loop closings in my career. I've had a few. Okay, so I had a tragic accident loop that I'm thinking of. I had a childhood sex abuse from a local bully loop. I had one of those that we closed. In other words, I've had a few closures, but I have to say that I've only chased a few. And the reason I've chased a few is that they're rare. Most people are not having open loops behind tragic events where there's been significant losses, where their brain actually believes that there's important information that they've missed, but they might be able to figure out. Now, people have problems. So they have obesity and they have conflicts in their relationships with other people. They have, a tough marriage. They got a problem with their daughter. They got problems. And if they go to therapy, therapists may start digging around looking for these things. Well, there's tragedy in your life. Oh, well, this is why it is. You got to have problems with your mother, and now you got problems with your daughter, and that's because you're replaying that because of the trauma that you had. No, you're not. No. Traumatic events are designed by your biology to be exceedingly careful in not expanding the range of what. In other words, when you're a rabbit and you see those little foxes down there and you realize this is a bad place, you don't go to a new place and say, well, everything that has an oak tree in it is bad because that place had an oak tree. No, you don't say every place that has a swale is bad because that had a swale. No, okay. Every place that had, little azalea bushes is bad. No. What you do is that you are triangulating on extremely narrow features of the environment that were associated with being problematic. The reason why that's true is if you widened it, your nervous system would become dysfunctional in its ability to make computations in your best interest. If you had a bad breakup with a boyfriend on your 19th birthday, then not only would you not ever want to have a relationship with a boy again, every birthday that you had would now be a tragedy because it would be reminding you of the 19-year-old birthday that you had that went south when your boyfriend broke up with you. Okay? So that's not how the nervous system works. Strangely enough, people are slightly have slight recall of tragedies and anniversaries, but they're not enough to make it be a big deal. They're a very small deal, but they notice. Sometimes people will notice, like, you know what, this it's my birthday and it happens to be the day that my mom died in an auto accident. Okay? That's usually, anniversaries usually aren't that important. What are important in human causality is people, places, and things. So I have no doubt that Frank Sinatra, driving by the place where his mother crashed in Palm Springs and died, probably would pause out and look at those mountains and think about that a little bit and have a few minutes that would rattle around his skull as he would relive that tragedy. And his brain would say, I wonder what we could have done differently, how life would have been different had she not been on that plane. Okay? That's how the nervous system does this. So when it comes to me working with anybody about anything like this, if you have something that has been an open loop that keeps visiting over and over and over and over again in your life, that's probably a really good thing to talk to somebody like me or Jen about, because we don't have a fanciful psychodynamic and highly erroneous view of why it's there. We have a very principled understanding of why something like that would be there. It's there because you have a sense, your brain is calculating that there may be something important about the features of this that looks like it's a mystery that could be solved. And therefore, the nervous system is trying to actually understand the causal features of why this tragedy took place so that it can better identify it, so that it can prevent it better. The nervous system is not focused on the past, folks. It is relentlessly focused on the present and the future, because your mind is a biological operating system that's designed to optimize your biological outcomes. It is not some fanciful artistic system that's designed for a fairy tale story of tragedy and triumph and whatever psychodynamic things anybody thinks it is. No, this is a biological machine, and it is designed to serve you as best it possibly can. And so if you are struggling with something with an open loop, there's a reason. And very often it appears, incidentally, I don't recall ever having one that I didn't solve. In other words, it's surprising that if you know what you're looking for, very often you can find it. If you don't know what you're looking for, then sometimes it can be very hard to find.
Are there certain personalities that are more susceptible to loops?
Oh, sure. In other words, if you are more hyper-conscientious, you are overwhelmingly going to be far more sensitive to have open loops. Your mind will direct a great deal of time and energy trying to understand something down to the gnat's eyebrow in a way that somebody who's, I think the people with very low conscientiousness, when I think about this, I can't imagine a person with the low conscientiousness with an open loop. I just don't believe I don't believe that would happen. I think that's a neuroscientifical impossibility.
Wow. That's why I probably have so many.
You have open loops, AJ. I know you have loops that they. I don't even want to mention some of your loops because we got them shut.
Yeah, you should call me Fruit Loops. Seriously, I keep thinking about like this unfair grade I got in college like 42 years ago. I mean, I'm still doing that, and the teacher's dead.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Ooh, Gina says, "What if the open loop is with a dead person?"
Yeah, well, that would still be the case that there would be a principle. So, what was this thing about your loop, AJ? It was that you got a grade that was wrong.
It was really unfair, and I could have proven it, but it's just. Yeah, I mean, because I really wanted a 4.0, and like that B made me graduate instead of the highest. It was like the next one, those Kuma, and and it's like
So your brain was you're looping over the costs of not only a potential injustice, but also that you might not have done everything that you could have done to remedy it. Okay? And so your brain is basically saying, hey, listen, if something like this happens again, if you're about to get if you would qualify for some fancy award, and then somehow they're saying, well, you're not qualified because of this or that. And you're like, well, actually, that's unfair because I am this or that, and I am qualified for it. So your brain is basically tracking the principle and trying to see whether or not, whether or not it can get peace of mind that it has got it figured out how to stop that loss from happening in the future. And the only reason that would be in there inside of you 40 years later is because you're a hyper-conscientious nut.
Yeah. with a long memory. Yeah. I still remember April 1st, 1980, this thing that happened. And I mean, it's funny. Yeah. I love it. Thank you, Dr.
Great. I'm just glad you brought that up, AJ, because the hyper-conscientiousness is going to be the number one correlate of whether or not that's going to rattle in somebody's skull.
True, because the unconscientious probably don't remember, and if they do, they probably don't care.
That's right.
Yeah. How nice it might be to be one of those. Yes. Okay. This is great. I love it. It's so great talking to you. Susan says, how best to respond when folks that I have tried to help continue to complain about their health issues, but refuse to make any changes? I'm not a doctor. I would just say, quit trying to help them. They don't want your help.
Yeah. I actually, there's going to be, there's a lot of things that are behind that question. So for example, it's more frustrating if the people are otherwise costly to you. So if it's people in your family that you're having to take care of, or that you might have to take care of, and they're complaining about their health deteriorating, and you've told them what to do, not only are they wasting your time and energy by complaining, they are also potentially risking more of your time and energy as a result of their lack of self-sufficiency that is on the horizon. So I can see why sometimes people would be motivated and frustrated with that situation. But we're going to take this question at its face value, and that all it is that they whine and complain, and then they don't do what you say to fix it. That's fine. So the solution is your response is actually there would be a range of possible responses. So depending upon your relationship and the personality dynamics and how long it's going on, first of all, if people were irritating me like that in that way, I would be backing my relationship away from them because that would be an annoying characteristic. So that's one thing. Secondly, I would also say that it would be possible to do what it is that I call a sharp angle. So they're effectively complaining, and what we want to do is to indicate to them that the complaint is not going to be basically honored. So if they make a complaint, our attitude is, oh well, sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. It's like that kind of response lets them know that you are not in any way going to take this on as a problem for you. And so that's essentially saying your breath is wasted because I'm not even going to engage my mind to try to figure out how to help you. And I'm also not going to be inferring that you're being treated unfairly by life, and therefore you are due a concession from the village, including me, which is actually what the complaint is actually aiming at. It's aiming at getting a concession by complaining that something is unfair. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to feed back to them that we think that the outcome that they're experiencing is perfectly fair. And therefore we're not feeling motivated or uncomfortable by the fact that they've been treated unfairly by fate. So that's what I call a sharp angle. So essentially, so if they're, oh my God, it's just so blah, 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 and saying, oh, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Sometimes there's nothing you can do, i.e., I'm not doing a damn thing about this. It's not my problem. Okay, that's the subtext. And if you feed that kind of feedback to people a few times, sometimes they'll start to shut up with the complaining because the cost benefit of complaining isn't getting them anywhere. That's how I would handle it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I know you've answered this before, and we can actually refer Marie to your video on Dr. McDougall's website, I believe it is, and one on my YouTube channel on the cram circuit. But she says, can you ask Dr. Lisle about snacking and grazing, especially after dinner? I don't do it through the day, but after dinner, it's hard to break. Any ideas?
Yeah, this is your but this is probably a good time because we've answered a bunch of questions. This is a good time to take on free will, right? Aren't we? Did we start?
Yeah.
We might as well. We got like 13, 15 minutes to go.
Yeah, well, you are always welcome to go over if you choose.
Okay. All right, so let's try to, so when I get totally lost, AJ, remind me that this is about snacking and grazing after dinner, because I'll probably forget this in about 4 minutes. All right, so we could just answer some pithy response like, well, just make a rule that after 7 o'clock, after you eat dinner, you leave the kitchen, you don't go back. Okay, we could say that. And that might be the best thing that we could come up with. And that if you do that consistently, then you'll stop having the classical conditioning responses that are taking place afterwards, because your brain will be unconsciously anticipating that it's not going to get any more food. So, but that might take a couple of weeks for that classical conditioning to set in. So effectively, you're a little bit, what addiction is, by the way, folks, is just learning. It's just learning with intense reinforcement. So it's the same process when it's not such intense reinforcement, but it's still being reinforced. So after dinner, if you're nibbling around at something after dinner, your nervous system essentially learns that that's going to happen. And so therefore it will actually have a set of reflexes that will result in digestive enzymes, et cetera, being released. And you will be having some cravings and a discomfort if you're not snacking, because you're expecting it and you're preparing for it. Now, but if you go through that, that's the same thing as if you are expecting coffee and you go into coffee withdrawal because you've been drinking coffee every day for the last year, and now you don't drink the coffee and you start getting headaches. Now, so you would have a withdrawal process, and then once you go through a withdrawal process, if you are consistent and you stay out of the coffee, then you can stay out of the coffee. If you go back and start drinking the coffee, you're going to be right back into the trap. Same thing with the nibbling and grazing. Now, not that I think that there's anything inherently wrong with the nibbling and grazing. It depends on what we're nibbling and grazing on. It's a whole different discussion. But to the question of how it is that we stop it and how would we get ourselves to do it and why can't we get ourselves to do it about anything, this has to do with the question of free will. It has to do with the question of how it is that choices are made and how the nervous system actually operates and how one can change it. And does changing it mean that we are invoking free will in a positive direction? The answer to that question is no. Okay, there is no free will. Now, what there is that there's something that is much more useful than free will. So free will is, and it looks like free will, it smells like free will, it tastes like free will, it acts like free will, but it's not. So this is a deep misunderstanding, and always has been throughout the history of philosophy. The philosophers in the last 5,000 years couldn't have possibly know what we know about neuroscience. But today in neuroscience, we can actually step through this logic in a way that we never could before. And now I can present to you the solution to the free will problem. Now, your brain is designed by nature to have you, to give you feelings that will cause you to, you're trying to optimize this thing that we're going to call feelings, which are feedback systems that indicate that we are either improving our biological circumstances or they're getting worse. So our feelings are feedback devices for our circumstances and whether or not things seem to be getting better or things that seem to be getting worse. Now, when things get better, then there's a high tendency for there to be an improved statistical likelihood of our genes being on the planet in 100 years. So that means if you get a little bit healthier when you were sick, well, you're more likely that your genes on the planet. And you say, well, I'm 70 years old. I'm not going to reproduce. What do you mean? Well, if you're more likely to survive, you're more likely to be able to be of value to some of your genes that are on the planet that could be reproducing. In other words, you're designed by nature to seek better circumstances for yourself where it indicates that you're more likely to survive, or if you're of age, more likely to reproduce. Now, and so that would also include, for example, if you're a grandmother, you should be delighted at looking at successes of your grandchildren. And you should be looking to try to aid and abet their likelihood of survival and reproduction, which you will. So people are going to call me and say, oh my God, my daughter-in-law is feeding my grandchildren shit. What am I supposed to do? Answer, you are calculating that your odds of your grandchildren surviving and being attractive, et cetera, and being able to get choice reproductive opportunities is going down the drain because they're in the pleasure trap because your daughter-in-law is, ignorant and resistant to your information, et cetera, et cetera. So we see that your feelings are derivatives of calculations about survival and reproductive success. That's true for every animal. That's what's going on. That's why your cat feels what it feels, your dog feels what it feels, the camel feels what it feels. Feelings are derivatives of survival and reproductive threats and opportunities. Okay. Now, so it's going to turn out what the brain does is the brain has three essentially interactive databases. The first database is the value system for the organism. So as you're a human, you value things that humans value. You don't value things that sharks value. There's some overlap because you're both living things, but if you're a female human, you're not attracted to male great white sharks. You're just not, okay? So, and if you're a camel, you're not attracted to horses. That's not how you work. If you are a rabbit, you are not attracted to foxes in any way. If you're a fox, you're attracted to rabbits because you're going to eat them. You have universal value systems that you inherently value and they cannot be learned. And they are also, by the way, not altered. Okay? So your value systems are not altered. Now, because those are the base values for the survival and reproductive problems of that particular species. So your value system is your value system. Now, it doesn't do your brain is to make decisions to move towards things that are valuable and move away from things that are dangerous. So move away from the great white shark, move to the place on the beach that's serving pina coladas. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's not very difficult. Follow your feelings of comfort, security, relaxation, excitement, sexuality, sensuality, pleasantry, laughter, and move away from mean, vicious, dangerous, dirty. Got it? Not too difficult to figure this out once we look at it. So in order for you to do that, to move towards good things and move away from bad things, you have to know where the good things are and where the bad things are. And so you have another database that helps you make those decisions. That's going to be called your sensory system. So you've got eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and touch. You've got a way to connect the value system to the outside world. So now it's like, oh, okay, well, now this makes a lot of sense. You also have a motor system, i.e. musculature, that is attached to your bones that helps you move away from bad things and move towards good things. That's how it works. So now we see how the psychology works. Psychology works by looking at different things out there in the environment that are valuable or dangerous, running a calculation as to which are the most valuable, what's the best deal out there we should be pursuing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then, but we already know what's valuable, but we have a sensory system that tells us about what the environment looks like. And then we calculate, gee, can we get the most valuable thing? And our nervous system says, no, I don't think we could. We know that's the most valuable, but that's under a lot of competitive pressure. We can't get there. But we might be able to get the third rung down and definitely stay away from that stuff over there that's dangerous and dirty. So your job by nature is to calculate the best deal, running a cost-benefit analysis in order to get the most biological value per unit of energy expended. There could be no other way that a nervous system would be constructed. A nervous system would have to be constructed in order for an animal to have a value system that already has pre-calibrated understanding of values assessments. So if you've got a glass of tea in your hand and it tastes good and you're sitting with friends and you're about to take another sip and it's hot, so it's valuable, but a spider falls on your wrist, you will immediately, you might spill your tea all over the place while you flick the spider off. You don't know that that spider is poisonous, but it comes from a class of organisms that could be deadly. And therefore, the possible risk that that thing could bite you and kill you or cause serious injury is sufficiently high that it is not worth worrying about your tea glass and that you may drop it on the ground and it may break. That is not as big of a loss as the potential loss of your life. And therefore, you will freak out, and that will be what will happen. You will run a cost-benefit analysis on 2 or more alternative courses of action. Okay? You can imagine if you're some guy on your first backyard date with some gal that you're attracted to, and that happens, and you're going to watch this nervous system do a super rapid computation, you know what I mean? And it will probably freak out anyway, but because that will be overwhelmingly the right thing to do, or even though you'll feel weird about it as you recognize you're making a spastic ass out of yourself while that happens. That's happened to me a few times. Those are traumas, AJ, that I have remembered for years. Okay, now so now what we're going to see is you got a sensory system hooked up to a value system that's running a cost-benefit analysis that is making a decision as to what's in your best interest for your biology. You have one last database that enters the equation. Remember, I told you earlier about the rabbit that goes around the field and then finds the carrots, and then the next day it goes right to the carrots. It doesn't spend its time around the field because it can now conserve energy because its memory system is improving its understanding of the reality. So your memory system also weighs in, and it puts its thumb on the scale of the cost-benefit analysis that would be run if it was just the value system interacting with the sensory system. So this is why a chicken crosses the road. The chicken crosses the road because the chicken has a universal chicken value system that can analyze the different costs and benefits of different features of the environment. It's got, a mouth, nose, taste, hearing, sight. It's got all kinds of equipment to analyze a careful assessment of its environmental threats and opportunities. It then also has a memory system of where it's been, et cetera, and what kinds of things look like they go with what. And so it all those things together triangulate on whether the chicken crosses the road or not. Okay, that is why the chicken crosses the road. It crosses the road because it runs a very complex cost-benefit analysis that you cannot understand because you don't have a chicken value system. A lot of times you can anticipate other people's behavior very well because you do have a human value system. So when you see them start to behave in a way, you understand why it is that they're behaving in the way they are, because you might behave very similarly if you were in their circumstances. Now people are trying to figure out free will. And they're going to say, why do I do this screwball self-destructive thing when I could be doing something else? And the answer is because your adaptive unconscious runs a cost-benefit analysis and it tells you that that's the right decision. And you say, well, I don't want it to make that decision. And the problem is you don't have a choice because the choice is made unconsciously. So the choices that you make are made in your mind. We're going to call that the adaptive unconscious. Now you might say, yeah, but that's not true because when I'm sitting there contemplating which movie to go to, I could go to the one about horses and I could go to the one about a gangster. I could go to either one. I could choose. Yeah, you, which is your adaptive unconscious, will choose. But your adaptive unconscious makes that choice according to very sophisticated multidimensional cost-benefit analyses. It uses its universal value system. It uses the sensory database that it has. It's looking at the 2 posters of the 2 movies, and it sees some beautiful horse, and then it sees a gangster with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, and it runs a calculus based on its memory system, and it says, the last time I saw Pesci and De Niro, man, it was awesome. So yeah, even though I like the look of that horse movie because it looks romantic and fun, the truth is, man, I got to see this Pesci and De Niro movie. Well, what is that? That is your adaptive unconscious running a cost-benefit analysis. And it will run that cost-benefit analysis, and it is not free of anything. It is using every scrap of known information that it can do to put pressure on the system in order to come up with the correct calculation that will give you the best bang for your buck. That's how it is. That's what it does. The notion of free will is that, oh, but I could have done it. I could have done the other thing. No, actually, you couldn't have. Based on the information that your adaptive unconscious had at the moment that you made the decision, you made the only decision that was possible. Okay? There was an alternative, but that was an alternative decision that was ruled out by the cost-benefit analysis. You might say, well, what if I just throw out the cost-benefit analysis? You can't throw out the cost-benefit analysis. Cost-benefit analysis is you. Okay? So now you're like, well, what the hell is the difference between that and free will? I don't know. I'm just telling you that the choices that you make are a derivative of absolutely unconscious calculations that you don't get to override just because you would want to override them. All that you're overriding is you're aware that there are alternatives, that you could have bet on, beat the band instead of, I don't know, Silver Swallow. But you bet on Silver Swallow. You knew you could have bet on Beat the Band, and you went back and forth. But your adaptive unconscious was running calculations as to which horse you thought would win, and it went back and forth and back and forth. And when it finally made a decision, it went to Silver Swallow. You're like, shit! I could have had Beat the Band. I would have made a lot of money. Yeah, in principle, you could have made that choice, but you didn't. And at the moment that you made the decision, you could not have. You can't suspend the cost-benefit analytic engine of the brain. It is you. Okay. Now, well, what does that mean? Well, it's kind of interesting what it means. It's actually very inspiring to me as a clinical psychologist to know that people do not have, quote, free will. What they have is the ability to change the cost-benefit analysis that they do and therefore change their behavior pattern because they can learn something new about the cost, benefit, and analytic parameters. And they can learn it from me. I can tell them, had you thought about this? Oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, well, we just influenced your cost benefit analysis. I wonder if I influenced it enough for you to do things that are going to be in your best long-term interest now. Turns out we check in next week and it didn't happen. It's like, oh, well, I didn't influence you enough. Let's try again. What about had you thought about doing this or thought about doing that? That might help you do this. Do you see how that would work? Oh, yes, I see how that would work. Good, let's try that and see if that works. We try that again. Nope, it turns out that the adaptive unconscious still ran the cost-benefit analysis, and even though it got closer, it still ran it in the favor of the self-indulgence. When you're trying to beat the pleasure trap, remember, the universal value system, the cost-benefit and analytics, there's a very high thumb on the scale towards the pleasure trap. It's going to be very tricky to try to tip that thing over, to try to make you able to calculate what's in your best interest. That's why we're so big on the environment. We're also big on repeated education. That's important. My good friend, Justina Fries, now she started out doing things the way I do them, which is just one consultation at a time. Because I try to then come up with a behavioral prescription where we run one experiment and then we see what happens. But Justina, in working with problematic eating, specifically often with binge eating, she said, the truth is in her practice, she's learned that it's better for people to have a regulated program over a month. That is a better thing. It's a better way. She gets better results when she does that. So she will still do a consultation with you, a one-time consultation, but she has developed a very outstanding integrated 28-day program that takes a person with that problem and takes them through a series of exercises and experiments that is better really than the way that I've done it in my career. I've never actually gone to the trouble of integrating such a program. There's all kinds of people that have done things like that I think are good. Chef AJ has challenges that are for everybody, but specifically for something like binge eating, an expert analysis that has worked with this problem over a long time and knows a lot about it, and now has a series of experiences that wind up doing a better job of doing what? Educating the adaptive unconscious so that it makes better decisions. Okay, so this is the so quite frankly, when you start looking at what's going on, two people trying to make a decision on the street corner about which movie to go to, and you're like, well, which do you want to go to? Well, I don't know. What do you want to go to? Well, I don't know. I was thinking about the one with the horses. What about you? Yeah, I could go to the one with the horses, but the one with the Joe Pesci, I don't know. I might be up for that. You're like, really? You never liked movies like that? Yeah, but I want to meet you to be happy, and I feel like I'm up for it. Okay, so what's going on there? What's going on is people are getting new information about their environment. That environment is their social dynamic between the two of them. Okay, and as a result, what's happening as I get information from the other person, it's going into my adaptive unconscious and it's altering my cost-benefit analysis. Okay, and therefore it's changing my decision. Now, you might say, well, that looks like free will. No, what's free about it? I'm actually seeking the best information I can in order to make the best decision I can, all factors being considered. And when I do make that decision, it will have been based on my very best estimate about what was in my best interest, which may very much include what you're thinking and what you're feeling. It's tricky with very agreeable, conscientious people to find out what they really want because they're trying to find out what I really want. And then we go in a virtuous circle and we can't quite figure it out. It's tricky to deal with people like that. It's easy to deal with Alan. You say, I want this. He says, no, I want that. And then you wind up doing what you want. But anyway, that's the detailed story of free will. And in no way is it uninspiring to realize that, no, our cost-benefit analysis is not free of anything. It's tethered to very sophisticated computations. It would be, in fact, a biological disaster if an organism had the ability to calculate such a complex cost-benefit analysis for its best interest, and then it suddenly had a moment of blank out where it gets to just choose anything, irrespective of the cost-benefit analysis. Of course it doesn't. It would never have such a characteristic. The organism is always making its decisions on very sophisticated unconscious calculations. That is not free will. It is what life is. Okay. That does not mean it cannot improve. It does not mean you cannot learn. It does not mean that, that there isn't tremendous potential for a future that might improve. Those improvements will happen because more information and better information will come into the system. Okay. So that is the answer to an ancient mystery.
Okay, I forgot the question. No.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The question, that was your job to remember.
How do we stop grazing and snacking after dinner? She can get through the day, but after dinner.
Right. So, i.e., then we realize that so the education that I'm trying to give her is that she is probably classically conditioned to have digestive activation because she's doing it consistently. So therefore, just like any addict, she might have to go through a period of white knuckling it where she makes absolutely no snacking at all for a period of, say, 14 days. And in about 14 days, it's very likely she can counter condition those reflexes. And on day 15, she may find that those cravings are 90% gone, and in some days 100% gone. Okay, we try that.
It's so we have a very smart audience because Dwayne, who's watching live, he writes in the chat, I think I heard that night eating is a learning and relearning process, and there is an uncomfortable period of pushing through before the breakthrough. That kind of sounds just like that.
100%. That is exactly how it's going.
Yeah, it's so fun talking to you. Thank you so much. It's just I don't learn something. I learn a lot of new things every time. And I always listen to it again the next day or right after. So thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Lisle.
Absolutely. My great pleasure. Thanks for having me, AJ.
Sure. I hope you'll come back soon. And I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when we have Plant Fit Meg, who's lost a lot of weight on a plant-based diet and is making chocolate zucchini muffins, not carrot cake muffins, Dr. Lisle, which you would be interested in, but chocolate zucchini. All right. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.